The Horn of Africa is one of the most vulnerable to climate change and the extreme weather event occurring with increased frequency and intensity. Since 2016, 8 of the rainy seasons have seen below average rainfall. The last famine was declared in Somalia in 2011 when 260,000 people, half of them children under the age of 6, died of hunger. From southern Ethiopia to northern Kenya and Somalia, around 22 million people are at risk of hunger as worst drought in 4 decades grips the Horn of Africa. According to the United Nations report in January, 12 million people in Ethiopia, 5.6 million in Somalia, and 4.3 million in Kenya are acutely food insecure. More than 4.5 million livestock have died since 2021, and another 30 million weakened and emaciated animals are at risk. The overall figure has almost doubled from 13 million in 2022. Across the region, 1.7 million people have been driven from their homes by a lack of water and pasture. Mohamed Guri, like other nomadic herders across the Horn of Africa, has been waiting desperately for more than 2 years for rains that have not come. Like many herders in the east of Ethiopia, he has been forced to give up his nomadic existence after seeing his livestock decimated by drought.
I have decided to move from a life of shepherd to a new way of life. I want to start a business, even if it is a small business, just to take care of my family.
In the Somali region and throughout southeastern Ethiopia, as well as drought-hit areas of northern Kenya, pastures have turned to dust, wells have dried up, and increasing numbers of nomads are abandoning their self-sufficient. According to the Tourism Ministry in Kenya, drought claims more than 200 elephants in 9 months in the region.
The drought has caused mortality of wildlife, mostly herbivore species. The mortalities have risen because of the depletion of food resources and as well as water shortages. Drought has resulted in the deaths of the following species of wildlife. Wildebeest, we've lost a total of 512 animals. Common zebra, we've lost a total of 381. Our elephants, we've lost a total of 205.
The last 5 rainy seasons since the end of 2020 have failed, triggering the worst drought in 4 decades in Ethiopia, Somalia, and Kenya. The next rainy season from March to May is also expected to be below average. Dire conditions in the Horn have been amplified by the war in Ukraine, which has contributed to the soaring food and fuel costs. According to the UN Children's Agency, UNICEF, almost 2 million children across Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia require urgent treatment for severe acute malnutrition, the deadliest form of hunger. 730 children have died in nutrition centers in Somalia between January and July 2022 as a result of lack of water, milk, food, and often living in squalid conditions. Also, some 2.7 million children have stopped going to school.
Due to the drought, my child did not receive appropriate medical service. We were too busy coping with the drought, saving the livestock, and thinking of the family's survival. All these issues deteriorated the condition of my child.
When the mother is malnutritioned, fed, malnourished, she may have a child with malnutrition again. When she is pregnant, she may be malnutritioned. She may birth a child with malnutrition. So, her breasts do not have enough milk. When there is a drought, diarrhea may occur there, and then after diarrhea, malnutrition will come there.
In November 2022, Kenya's President William Ruto, during his COP27 speech in Egypt, stressed the need for necessary measures to recognize Africa's special needs and circumstances.
It is estimated that by 2050, climate impacts could cost African nations US dollars 50 billion annually. The Horn of Africa region, including Kenya, is experiencing the worst drought in 40 years. 2 consecutive years without rain have visited misery on millions of people. Kenya's world-renowned wildlife heritage has not been spared either, and carcasses of elephants, zebras, wildebeest, and many other wild fauna litter our parks. We have had to spend US dollars 3 million to supply feed and water to wildlife in the last 3 months. Loss and damage is not an abstract topic of endless dialogue. It is our daily experience and the living nightmare of millions of Kenyans and hundreds of millions of Africans. Africa contributes less than 3% of the pollution responsible for climate change, but is most severely impacted by the ensuing crisis. Africa, and it is therefore only fair and proper that this conference takes necessary measures to recognize Africa's special needs and circumstances.
World Food Programme has warned that an ever-increasing number of people are facing famine, as Russia's invasion of Ukraine has led to a shortage of food, fertilizers, and increased fuel costs.
It's hard to believe that just a few years ago there were only 80 million people marching to starvation around the world. That's starvation, not chronic hunger. Then it jumped to 135. Why? Man-made conflict and climate shocks. That's before COVID. COVID comes along, just economic devastation, supply chain disruption around the world. The number goes from 135 to 276 million people. You think it can't get any worse. Then the breadbasket of the world is shut down, Ukraine. Now the longest bread lines in the world. The number has now jumped from 276 million people to 350 million people marching to starvation, not knowing where the next meal is coming from, because Ukraine alone grew enough food to feed 400 million people. Now, compounded with the fertilizer crisis, the fuel crisis, I could go on and on. It's all bubbling all around the world. The world is in serious trouble right now. We were expecting to announce famine in Somalia, for example, because they've had 4 or 5 back-to-back seasons of droughts, 40 years of unprecedented no rain. The United States, Germany, and other donors stepped up in magnificent ways, and we've been able to, I don't know if the right word's avert famine, but we definitely have postponed it. But they are facing unprecedented climate impact. And not just them, we can go to other areas like the Somali region of Ethiopia, the entire Horn of Africa, parts of Kenya. And then you get into Western Africa having droughts and the impact. We're looking at food production in Africa being down. We're already looking at food production down in India, Argentina, the United States. I can go on and on. So this is a serious issue. And who's going to pay the biggest price? The poorest of the poor. So if we don't get ahead of this, you will have mass migration and potentially mass starvation in nations around the world.
Currently, only 55.5% of the $5.9 billion sought by the United Nations to tackle the crisis has been funded. There is no end in sight for the hunger crisis, and hope is slowly fizzing out. Omotayo Arawi, Arise News.